The Sound of Your City fundraising drive takes place from Monday, May 26th to Sunday, June 1st. We hope that you will consider to make a financial donation today at www.ciut.fm. Help us continue to grow from the roots up. With your financial support, CIUT will continue to deliver the sound of your city each and every day. Donate now at www.ciut.fm.
From the roots up, CIUT 89.5 FM, Toronto.
Play.
Try me.
Hello, hello, and welcome to this very, very special episode of Tracks from Abroad. Since 2021, our show, through multiple teams and about 24 undergraduate students here at the University of Toronto, have been sharing the sounds of your world, interviewing guests from around the globe, and forging connections through stories, sound, and songs. Now, in 2025 and episode 163, it is time for us to say bon voyage, as each of our team members journeys off to new and exciting projects. But before we say goodbye, we wanted to take a moment to look back and reflect on some of our very favorite moments throughout the history of the show. Coming up on the program, we'll be hearing from international students, U of T professors, and guest artists, all sharing the music and stories that are important to them. As we take this journey through the TFA archives, I also want to take a moment to remind our listeners about the ongoing CIUT Sound of Your City Spring fundraising campaign. This year, our station goal is to reach $100,000 in listener donations. Your support enables shows like our own to continue on our mission to highlight diversity in programming, creating platforms for seldom heard voices and stories through the medium of radio. Donations can be made online at www.ciut.fm or on the phone at 416-946-7800. Toll free is 1-888-204-8976. Remember that with donations of $120, you'll get access to an exclusive selection of vintage CIUT t-shirts or hats. And with $175 donations, you'll receive both. Once again, that's ciut.fm online or 416-946-7800. Toll free 1-888-204-8976 to donate. Now get yourself comfortable and stay tuned to 89.5 FM as we take a sonic journey through the TFA archives. We're transporting you back to 2023 and the original host and creator of Tracks from Abroad, Jesse McDougall, as he shares some of his favorite interview moments, anticipating his receipt of the 2023 NCRA Best in Student Programming Award. This is Tracks from Abroad.
Are you proud of the country of France? Do white people have it better off in Mexico? There is a war on in Ukraine. What are your thoughts? How does Ghanaian clothing affect your sense of fashion? What does it feel like to be on stage and to see everybody moving and clapping to your music?
Almost it's the best feeling for me so far.
Tracks from Abroad.
Tracks from Abroad.
Tracks from Abroad.
Tracks from Abroad.
Hello folks at the NCRA. You are listening to a 10-minute reel of Tracks from Abroad segments broadcast during 2022. My name is Jesse McDougall, and every week on Tracks from Abroad, I interview a different U of T student with ties to a country outside of Canada. Our objective on the show is to amplify diverse voices on campus, but I've also been lucky enough to speak to faculty, community members, and musicians, either local or touring, to connect the U of T community with the broader world. Some recurring themes on Tracks from Abroad include culture, politics, and the student experience. So today we're going to start off with some of the best segments of 2022 involving culture. And this first one comes from a Pakistani student. His name is Latif Baloch. He's a political advocate, and he talks about how people make houses where he's from in Pakistan. Enjoy the show. I saw a very interesting video on your Instagram page.
Yes, it's my village.
It's your village.
Yeah.
Okay, now the video is of you building a house from scratch.
Yeah.
Is that a common practice? It was amazing for me to see this go up by hand.
Yeah, still there are people in Balochistan, they lived in hut houses or brush houses in Balochistan. They made it from the scratch, from woods and some other brushes. And I know how to make a roof. I know how to make some like carpet with brushes, because I grew up, our people did it for living. It's their living. They don't have any job opportunity. They don't have any education, nothing.
How would you describe a typical day in Karkikad, where you grew up?
Oh, in my village?
In your village.
No, it's like a little village, but there's only one well to get out, to bring water up. So everyone tried to go early to make it earlier, because then they came back they have to make food. Like for breakfast, we usually ate like bread from last night we made, and after that, like you can see men going for work. Also, that time there was lots of livestock, but now because of drought and climate change, they are gone. And kids, especially we sometimes go to collect wood, firewood, and also bring other stuff. We live in close to mountains, so there's a small mountain, so we went there, sit on it during the evening, and all shepherds come from mountains. Yeah, during the evening we sit together, or as elders, everyone. We learn lots of stories. That was nothing else we had.
While working on Tracks from Abroad, it's been amazing for me to see the variety of backgrounds that students come from, whether they're from Toronto or whether they're from Karkikad in Pakistan, as you heard from Latif. We're now going to hear from another student named Brittany as she tells us about Carnival, how it's celebrated in the Caribbean.
A little bit of history here. So Carnival, I wrote a paper, actually I have an article on this being published this year in the Caribbean Studies Journal on Carnival. So Carnival originated from colonial times. It was a celebration to the abolition of slavery. French colonists in Trinidad, because it originated in Trinidad, used to have carnivals where they would dress up, masquerade balls, and mock the slaves. When emancipation happened, the slaves, or the enslaved people, I think we're going to call them that because it's more of a respectful term, the enslaved people started to dress up as in exaggerated versions of these colonists. But they used to dress up as these colonists, or, as figures from their traditional stories, like the Moko Jumbies, for example, which is men on stilts, and they're dressed up like African ghosts, technically. Okay. Very colorful, very nice. And this goes against colonial beauty standards, because for the longest time, African and Indian women were thought of as over-sexual and ugly compared to the white women. So they dressed up in colorful clothing, feathers. We call that pretty mass. So that's different from traditional mass, which is short for masquerade. Okay. To the average person, it's just an over-sexualized event where people go to see the girls dressed up in tiny little bikinis and dancing on people, but they don't know the history behind it. And the history is what makes it so special, and it's so sacred in that way. And celebrating the trauma that our people went through for so many years, like hundreds upon hundreds of years, and that's what makes it so special. And that's why I'm so protective of it. To Caribbean people, it's a celebration of history.
Well, that was Brittany talking about Trinidad, and Tracks from Abroad has done episodes on every single continent except for Antarctica so far.
Over the years, as the scope of the show expanded, Tracks from Abroad moved to become a volunteer team. In TFA's 81st episode, we were introduced for the very first time to the second generation of hosts on the show, Seth Martosh and Alex Truxell. You'll hear their voices coming up as they journeyed to Greece in September of 2023.
Άιντε μες της γης το πυρωμένο κέντρο, άιντε δυο πουλιά φιλιούνται σε ένα δέντρο. Άιντε πέφτει λάβα, λάβα απ' τα φιλιά τους. Άιντε και φτερά, πολυθωμένα απ' τα κορμιά τους. Άιντε φύτρωσε, φύτρωσε μια παπαρούνα. Άιντε που έχει στόμα, στόμα και ταγκάνι. Άιντε κι όλο λέει πως δεν το ξανακάνει. Άιντε εκεί βαθιά, βαθιά στα σωθικά μου. Άιντε κάτι γίνεται κυρά μου. Άιντε χίλια άλλο κάτι φλαγυρίζουν. Άιντε έξοδο ζητάν και μαλωνίζουν. Άιντε δώσιμα κοντά 2 μέτρα βάθος. Άιντε λένε πως φυλακίζουνε το πάθος. Άιντε ρίχνουν κόμμα, με λουλούδια ρένουν. Άιντε και θαρούν πως ξεβερδεύουν.
Travel around the globe with Tracks from Abroad.
A student-run radio show broadcasting from U of T.
Hear voices and experience cultures from all over the world.
Tracks from Abroad.
Tracks à l'étranger. Tracks from Abroad.
Tracks from Abroad.
Tell your story by emailing us at tracksfromabroad@ciut.fm.
And tune into the show Mondays at 6 p.m. on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Hello and welcome to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. My name is Alex Troxel and I'm here with Jesse McDougall.
That's me, I'm here.
This is our first live show as a volunteer team on Tracks from Abroad. You may have noticed that from the minor wrinkles starting off the show today.
Oh, that's nothing. I've had way worse than that.
I'm sure you have, but you also have very high highs that I am expected to live up to. So it's going to be really exciting to be a co-host this year.
Oh, well, thank you. Let me move these mics that are in between us so I can see you. Yeah, I'm stoked to have Alex here today. And for all the people listening who have listened to Tracks from Abroad through and through, thanks for coming back today, Monday at 6 p.m. And we are also going to have another co-host joining us later on. His name is Seth Martosh. He actually recorded an introduction that I'm going to play momentarily. So he had a bit of a... I don't know, we can say a family arrangement today that he had to get to, but he will be here next week, and you can hear his luscious voice. So while I'm pulling this up, talk a little bit, Alex, about why you wanted to join Tracks from Abroad.
Well, I knew that it plays such an interesting role in the CIUT landscape of connecting both interviews and student voices with world music, which I think is something that is really fascinating for the Greater Toronto Area.
Fantastic. Okay, I've got this little. Here's Seth Martosh introducing himself on Tracks from Abroad.
Hello everyone and welcome to Tracks from Abroad. My name is Seth Martosh and I'm one of the co-hosts we have here on the show this year. A little about myself, I'm a fourth-year architecture specialist with a minor in French. I love playing soccer and more importantly discovering super weird music from all around the world. So naturally Tracks from Abroad appealed to me. I'm super excited to be sharing the fascinating conversations and cultures we have in store for you and listening to some incredible music in the process. Tracks from Abroad is the premier place to learn about diversity on campus here at U of T and getting you familiar with customs and perspectives you may not otherwise encounter. Hope you enjoy the show and tune in on...
All right. Well, that was Seth.
That was very smooth, Seth. Very well done.
Yeah, no, really well done for Seth. So, again, to recap, next week we're going to have the full team, Seth Martosh and Alex Traxel here, taking over as the co-hosts on Tracks from Abroad.
Hello, this is Ian Gillis back in 2025. If you are just joining us this evening, we're taking a look back through the archives of Tracks from Abroad in honor of this, our final broadcast at CIUT. We're heading back now to Christmas Day of 2023, when Seth made a special holiday broadcast looking back at some of the team's favorite guest interviews on his very first season.
Hello, and welcome to this holiday edition of Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. Today is the 94th episode of our show as we head towards the new year. TFA is an entirely student-made show which gives a voice to the thousands of international students on our campus here at the University of Toronto. And because we're students ourselves, our team of 9 undergraduates is celebrating the end of exams, which wrapped up last week. It's a relief, and we thought this week our show could reflect back on some of our best interview moments from Season 9, that is, episodes 81 through 90, which we broadcast throughout the fall semester. Of course, you can hear all of the 93 and counting episodes we've recorded with students, professors, and musicians from all over the world on podcasting platforms or at ciut.fm. So, if you'd like to hear some Malaysian, Lebanese, or Brazilian music as you enjoy your holiday, you can tune into that and much more at your convenience, thanks to Tracks from Abroad. Our first interview highlight will be with Megan, a Scottish student from episode 83, who begins by talking about the city of Glasgow.
So I'm from a city called Glasgow in Scotland in the UK, and I've actually lived there my entire life. I'm 31 years old. So this is my first time actually moving away and living somewhere else. Glasgow is, I think it's the biggest city in Scotland, but when you've lived there for a while, it doesn't feel like it. Plus, Scotland's fairly small, so Glasgow's kind of small as well. Do you know, obviously Glasgow is the only sort of point of reference I have in my head. And I'm I kind of walk about going, that's a bit like Glasgow, that's a bit like, I can't help myself. But actually I think Toronto is it's got that same kind of grid-like thing, so it's fairly easy to navigate. I'm still getting my bearings though. I just know that the CN Tower is south, and that's about it.
Good to know. Took me way too long to realise that also. Yeah. Just follow the big needle of the sky. Yeah.
Tracks from Abroad volunteers have gone on to work on incredible projects, including our show creator, Jesse McDougall, now performing arts coordinator at the Aga Khan Museum, Michelle Kadir, digital content coordinator here at CIUT, and Seth Martosh, who is now the creator and host of Mercedium Stretch on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 right here on 89.5 FM. Then, of course, in August of 2024, my incredible co-host Amelia Spong and I made our very first introduction on the Toronto airwaves, taking over as your hosts on Tracks from Abroad. Since that time, we've had the opportunity to interview dozens of guests, from international students to professors and guest artists, visiting dozens of regions around the world and sharing countless stories and songs. Coming up, you're going to hear some of our very favorite musical moments and guest interviews that we've shared on our time here at Tracks from Abroad. But before we do, I want to take just another brief opportunity to let you know about the CIUT Sound of Your City Spring fundraising campaign. I hope that this look back through the Tracks from Abroad archives has given you a sense of some of the incredible work being done by students and volunteers here on the only remaining community radio station in Toronto. Your support will continue to enable us to lift up diverse voices in radio programming, sharing seldom heard stories and songs from Barrie to Buffalo. Donations can be made online at ciut.fm or on the phone at 416-946-7800. Now, back to the interviews.
Welcome back to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. We're continuing our interview with Professor Kalmar on the Czech Republic. So, Professor, you've recently come back from a research trip to Eastern Europe. Can you tell us a bit about that? Where did you go, and what were you researching there?
Well, I didn't only go to Eastern Europe. I went to Europe, and my research, I often make the point that it's a mistake to isolate Eastern Europe as some kind of a very different area, especially in the EU. So lately my work has been comparing peripherality, which I mentioned before, in Eastern and Southern Europe. And I talked about both one or more of these two in different ways, in different parts of Europe, Amsterdam, Dubrovnik, Ljubljana in Slovenia, and I went to Graz in Austria. And then I went to Komárno, where I spent many years of my childhood in Slovakia, and Bratislava and Prague. And my last stop was in Berlin, where I was invited to a conference organized by the German government. They have an anti-discrimination office. And I talk a lot about what I call controversially racism against Eastern Europeans, which perhaps in Canada is not that obvious, but it's becoming very obvious in Europe. And that's why the German government invited me.
So the postscript of your book is called Confessions of a Canadian Central European. I was wondering about your experience as a European who is studying Europe while at a Canadian institution.
Well, so here at U of T, we have some very good Europeanists, and we have a center for the study of Europe. So I feel very comfortable doing it here, but it's very necessary to go to Europe often, both to do research and to be in contact with colleagues. I would say that if I added them up, my closest colleagues, the majority are in Europe.
Find that you look at Europe differently being in North America?
Absolutely. I'm much more European than any European. And I say it's only possible when you don't live in Europe, because there people are French or German or Russian or what have you, and that's their identity. Well, I was never quite, in any of those boxes, but being outside, I think you get to be more European sometimes for various reasons. One is the attitude of Canadians who don't know much detail about Europe compared to a European. So you kind of become a European, or you become an Eastern European, or whatever categories people have. But it's also that you appreciate, when you're not in the European Union, what a wonderful arrangement that is, in spite of all the baggage it has, the colonial baggage, the Holocaust, and horrible things. So you might say that Europe is the worst place in the world, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. But the arrangement that exists there of free movement, not only for capital, but also for people, so also for labor, and anybody can move. And it's not like in the world at large that money can move anywhere, but people can't move to make money. In Europe they can. In the EU they can.
Professor Kalmar, you know that this is a show where we love to focus on music from around the world. You were telling us briefly, Amelia and I, about a really unique band that was from the Czech Republic, the Plastic People of the Universe, and how they had a role to play within a sort of revolutionary identity within the 20th century. Is that right?
Yes, that's very much so. It was much easier for people to go to a rock concert than to a demonstration against an oppressive government. and the Plastic People of the Universe attracted large crowds of people, and it was clear that this was an oppositional thing. Okay, so showing up at those concerts, somehow the communist regime was not very skillful at classifying rock and roll. So they were kind of against it, but it wasn't a crime. So people participated, both going to concerts, and Plastic People of the Universe were very important. And there were also some really very minor and not very good amateur bands, and I played in one of them myself. But it was always an act of defiance.
Yeah.
You are listening to the Plastic People of the Universe on Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Yay!
Fantastic. That was great. And we are wrapped up here.
It's all before 10 a.m.
Gdyż je dnes člověku 20, a chce se mu hnusem zvracet, ale těm, co je 40, je toho vyblít ještě více. Jen ten, komu je 60, a může jít se sklerózou klidně spát.
Welcome back to Tracks from Abroad on CIUT 89.5 FM. We are still in the studio today with Teach from Zimbabwe. I'm wondering, because you yourself are a musical artist, right? What did music look like growing up? Was that part of your family life, or how did you become exposed to music for the first time?
Yeah, so I was exposed to music from a very, very young age as a kid. So there's two parts of how that happened. The other part was at school, and the other part was at home. In my mom's side, all my uncles were musical. They were actually, some of them were active musicians. Some of them were not necessarily active, but they could play one instrument or the other. So I think the musical genes in me come from my mom's side, really, because from my dad's side, I happen to be the only one who ventured into music from my dad's side. And I grew up with my mom's family for the most part of my life. So I grew up seeing a lot of music around. We had a lot of, even on our national radios, they would play a lot of British, American music. Music by the Beatles, groups like the Commodores, musicians like Otis Redding. Those musicians we grew up hearing about them a lot. My uncles used to play in bands that were like more like, here we have tribute bands or cover bands for certain popular groups. So my uncles used to play in these cover bands. However, I also grew up exposed to traditional music too, because I have some uncles who were good like hand drummers of cultural music, like traditional. When we went to the rural to our rural home, where for ceremonies they would play traditional music, drums, right? So I was exposed to that growing up. That's where I also learned my early drumming skills. Then when I was school going age, I went to school, and in schools, they used to have groups. So mostly growing up, our school had a traditional dancing group. So they would teach pure traditional music like dancing and drumming. So I was part of a traditional dancing group for since I was grade 3, I think. Yeah, I can remember, since I was grade 3, because I was musical and I used to like banging on the drums at school, like on the desk. I sometimes would get into trouble, but my teacher at that time realized that I had talent, I could play. The first day that we started, I remember the first day that we started going to this traditional dance group, there were some older guys like who were seniors than me who wanted to play the drums, but my class teacher happened to be the one leading, and she said, "No, you know what? I know that kid can play very well. I've heard him play." But I thought, okay, well, I thought I used to get into trouble for that. We used to make noise in class, but yeah, it was so funny. But she said, "No, I've seen him playing on the desk before. I know he can play." So that's how I started playing hand drums in the traditional dance group. So
Well, you've mentioned the word traditional several times, but I'm curious what that looks like within the context of Zimbabwe, right? What are the kinds of instruments we tend to use? What are the structures within music? All those things, right?
Yeah. So in the context of Zimbabwe, there is traditional music that is sung, performed with just hand drums and clap and hand clapping and singing. And then we also have other traditional types of music where we have traditional instruments, like there's an instrument called mbira, which has been part of our culture for thousands of years. Thank God for the internet. If you Google, you'll be able to find it.
I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a the kalimba, right?
So from the way I understand it, the kalimba is actually a Western version of mbira. They're trying to westernize. It was a way of trying to westernize the African instrument. Right? It's mbira. We have different kinds of mbira in Zimbabwe. There's mbira dziradzimu. There's nyunga, which is the one that I play mostly. So there's different kinds of those mbiras. So there's another type of traditional music which is heavily based on that mbira instrument and the drumming. And we have the shakers, the hoshos. We call them hosho. The shakers that are made out of calabash, and we put the dried seeds inside, shakers. So mbira is an instrument that is made up of the board. It's on a flat board, which is wooden, and then the keys that you play are pieces of metal. They are attached to the board by a bridge, either a wooden or even a metal bridge that hold them down. So these metal keys are tuned to the different notes. There's different ways of playing. Some play using just their thumbs, but some play using their thumbs and index fingers. So that's how the instrument looks like. And then you can play it inside a gourd, because back then they didn't have amplification, right? So to make the sound a bit warm and heavier and bigger, they would also build a gourd from a bigger calabash.
Right.
Yeah,
so
which is with
a large open space to put the instrument inside to amplify the sound.
To amplify the sound. Yeah. So that's how the instrument gets played. So this instrument is important in that it was not only just for entertainment. It's an instrument that was of important spiritual significance in our culture, because it was mostly used in traditional ceremonies where we connect with our ancestors, our ancestral spirits. In some parts, only certain people can play that instrument. Not everyone can play that instrument. That means certain people who are called by the spirits to be playing that instrument can play that instrument in certain ceremonies.
And so, what would the outcome of that look like? What would the goal be?
Depending on the ceremony that's happening, we have some rainmaking ceremonies, or sometimes families consulting their ancestors for a message. There will be what we call spirit mediums, the people that the ancestors communicate through. So that kind of music from Mbira now would facilitate an environment where the spirits can communicate through a spirit medium, and then the spirit medium would communicate whatever message that has been sent to them. So during those ceremonies, that kind of thing was facilitated by Mbira, the sound of the Mbira. So that's why it is a very important part of our culture. Hey guys, this is Teach, and you are listening to Maduna Mtuna by a group called Mbiradze Narira on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Hey, this is Ian. You're about to hear an interview segment by host Amelia Spong chatting with Anna Sternsis, director of the Anne Tannenbaum Center for Jewish Studies.
I am curious about Yiddish music and its role in diaspora.
So it's just such an interesting question because when we talk about Yiddish music and its role in Jewish culture in general, we have to go back to Yiddish language. And as I said, from 1100 to mid of the 20th century, history of Yiddish and history of Ashkenaz Jews are identical. So wherever they live, wherever they settle, this is the language in which they make sense of all these experiences. And Jews have been a minority in Europe since the destruction of the temple, which is the first century, right? So they lived among other people, and their culture stayed, some of it stayed intact, like some of the religious laws, for example, moved with Jews wherever they went, but everything else incorporated elements of local culture. And Yiddish language itself, it's a Germanic language, like 70% of it is Germanic. So it started with a kind of Middle High German being written down with Hebrew letters. And then it incorporated some parts of Hebrew and then parts of Slavic languages as Jews kept moving throughout Europe. So in Germany, German lands, and then to Poland, and then to parts of when Poland became part of the Russian Empire there. So Yiddish is kind of this a reflection of all the contexts, diasporic contexts that Jews had for hundreds of years. So their music incorporated all these influences. And because Jews were often expelled from places where they lived, they took some of that culture with them. And what's interesting about Yiddish music is that today we can find traces of non-Jewish songs or non-Jewish tunes that survived in Yiddish culture much longer than survived locally because people just took it with them. So, for example, like really old Ukrainian or Polish songs from like the 18th century and earlier, some of that survived in contemporary Yiddish music. And generally, Yiddish music melodically is very similar to what was played at the time. Very similar if you listen to klezmer, to Balkan music, very similar to other genres of European folk music, later incorporated urban culture, so you got a little bit more instruments. Important to say that a lot of Yiddish music, in terms of tunes, in terms of instruments, was played with mobile instruments because people had to move. So Jewish piano players, a relatively recent phenomenon. The repertoire that those people play, like Jewish, urban residents, has nothing to do with Yiddish folk music. You know what I mean? Like that's a classical 19th century or even 18th century repertoire. Folk music is different, but Yiddish folk music, the one that survives, has a lot to do with weddings. So it's a celebratory things. A lot of it has to do with recording history. Yiddish music recorded some of the most important elements of Jewish history. A lot of them, unfortunately, had to do with violence. So there are a lot of Yiddish songs, for example, about violence against Jews in the 17th century. A lot of songs about recruitment in the army that they didn't want to go in the 19th century. A lot of songs about immigration, going to America, not being able to see your family members again. In the Soviet Union, a lot of songs about working in the fields and building new life. These are more propaganda songs. But anyway, if one looks at the texts of Yiddish songs throughout history, you can get a perspective of how people actually made sense of it. And there is no other source quite like it.
Well, Yiddish is known as sort of a funny language. So I was wondering what the connection between the Yiddish language and humor is.
So it's a very interesting question. And I study a lot, I think a lot about humor and how we make sense of it. Humor is a hugely important part of Jewish culture, and for what it's worth, any other diasporic culture, because humor allows people to handle disadvantages, find a moment of happiness in difficult situations, and generally makes life a lot more bearable. So Shalom Aleichem invented this phrase, laughter through tears. And that laughter through tears is a kind of signature mark of Jewish humor. There's also, by the way, that kind of tradition of Jewish humor, some with Yiddish, some with not, moved with Jews when they went to the United States. Think about all these comedians like Woody Allen and Jerry Seinfeld, later Larry David, Macy Jackson, like look, all these American comedians that build their brand on self-deprecating humor. And that self-deprecating humor is often attributed to Yiddish humor. And I often think about what it means to, and I teach about that in diaspora and transnational studies, what it means to have a self-deprecating, who do you actually laugh at? You know, there are a lot of jokes about Jewish mothers. For example, like Jewish mothers in those jokes, they love their kids so much that they hug them to the extent that they suffocate and kill them, right? Those Jewish mothers are overbearing and they like don't leave space and all this kind of stuff. Why is it called self-deprecating humor, right? Who is actually laughing at who? And it's interesting how a lot of Yiddish humor is laughing at those who assimilate a little slower, those who are holding behind. So, for example, you know, a young man is a law student and he's about to conquer the world. And here's his mom who says, oh, you have to marry a nice Jewish girl and you have to wear a hat because it's cold outside. So the tension between assimilation and pulling back to the old ways is that tension of Jewish humor in America.
Hey, this is Ian. You're about to hear an interview segment from our episode with Danley Ray Asabuke, an operatic baritone from the Philippines. So Danley, as we wrap up here, I'm wondering one last thing, and that's what it is about classical music that speaks to you specifically, and how you think that might speak to other people, especially other young people or people from non-Western backgrounds.
So, classical music for me has such a special, it just has a special je ne sais quoi. It's more raw of the classical art form, and you can, for some reason, you can feel the rawness of the emotions from all the musicians involved in the classical realm. It's just different when versus like a classical a musical theater versus like pop music for me. Like, yes, like pop music, like I do head bops all the time in pop, and I think like there's some good pop music and ballads that are connecting to people, which is why it's so popular. But I feel like you don't get the same rawness as the classical music, because it's for me it's more of an honest art form. The first opera that I watched was Madama Butterfly in Canadian Opera Company back when I was in high school in grade 10. That opera will always embedded to me because it is first the character is Asian, and the story of how a geisha was taken advantage by a white person from the America. He impregnated her, and then at the age of 15, and then 3 years later they have a baby, and then he came back 3 years later only to say that I'm gonna take the kid, but I have a wife in the US. And then lo and behold, the character Madama Butterfly killed herself. And growing up in an Asian culture, like you will see that kind of situation all the time, and seeing that in an opera setting will literally tell you that it is not just an art form that is only open to the Western community, but it's also highly significant to the Southeast Asian and the East Asian community too. And to me, like, yes, the barrier will be the language, I should say, and it's really hard when a non-Italian speaker or German or French will watch an opera like that and then just read the subtitles, and but seeing the action on stage seeing the actions and the drama on stage, I think it will be a huge yes to non-Western people, because they will say like, oh yeah, like that is relatable to like what we experience back home. And as a young artist, I think it is also important that we preserve that kind of culture and gather new audiences at the same time, because like, I'm not saying that the art form is dying, but the art form is somewhat almost disappearing because we're trying to stay in an old-fashioned way, and I think like it's quite important for us to give fresh ideas and not necessarily to create. I mean, like, I love working on contemporary music at the same time, and I think it's nice to work on new music from emerging composers. But at the same time, I think it's also important to revise the story and show the story in a more modern text. For example, in Vancouver Opera, just this season, we just did Die Fledermaus, and we set it on the 60s. And a lot of people don't like the idea of a non-modernized version because they like some old patrons will say, like, oh, like, if this is an opera, like, we want to see ball gowns, we want to see tuxedos, but not all the time that the young people will say, like, this is so relatable to me. Like, no, you will not hear people like that. But seeing people in, like, neon green suit, for example, and little like Caesar costumes and like Cleopatra and like costume party ideas really made a huge significance to like how people will view operas, because it just means that you are attracting new audiences. You are also trying to modernize it to make it relatable to everyone, and I think that is the most important part, is that to make it culturally significant and at the same time socially acceptable without crossing the boundaries. Hey Toronto, this is Danlery Asabuke. You'll be hearing my recording of Largo al Factotum from Il Barbiere di Sevilla by Rossini. Diri sa Musika sa Kalibutan on CIUT 89.5 FM.
Tracks from Abroad, CIUT 89.5 FM.
Fortunatissimo per verità, fortunatissimo per verità, la 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 la. Pronto per tutto l'anno il giorno, sempre d'intorno in giro sta, mio compagno per un barbiere, vita più nobile non si dà. Raso i pettini, lanciate i forbici al mio comando, tutto qui sta. Lanciate i forbici, raso i pettini al mio comando, tutto qui sta. V'è la risorsa, poi del mestiere, con la donnetta, col cavaliere, con la donnetta, tra la 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 lera, col cavaliere, tra la 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 la, che bel vivere, che bel piacere, che bel piacere.
And that's the last from us at Tracks from Abroad. As we wrap up the show here for the very last time, I want to take a moment to thank the incredibly talented group of students who have over 4 years dedicated their time, passion, energy, and enthusiasm into making this show something to be proud of every week. That's Jesse, Seth, Alex, Isabella, Rosa, Elżbieta, Danielle, Patricia, Angelina, Matthew, Andrew, Simon, Michelle, and more. Thank you for using your passions and your talents to uplift the voices of others. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense effort and impact of my incredible co-host, Amelia Spong, who is right now back at her home in California, tuning into Tracks from Abroad for the very last time. Amelia, you have been a constant support and an inspiration throughout our time together on this show, and I'm so proud to have shared this platform with you for the past year. One last time, be sure to check out our donation page at www.ciut.fm or call in at 416-946-7800 for the Sound of Your City Spring fundraising campaign. One last time, that's online at www.ciut.fm or 416-946-7800. Our toll-free line is 1-888-204-8976. From 7 to 8, Indigenous Waves will be playing right here on 89.5 FM. But till then, you're listening to Tracks from Abroad with Amelia Spong and Ian Gillis. These have been the sounds of your world.